What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Thursday, February 11th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the point guard position. So this is a FanDuel play only. I like Kemba Walker from the Boston Celtics playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing point guards, Kemba Walker has averaged 28 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 22, 19, and 36 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 29, 32, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 30 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.4 times value. He's only $5,500 FanDuel salary, but he is $1,000 more on DraftKings. So although he could hit value on DraftKings, much safer FanDuel play. Now, Kemba Walker has scored 35, 17, 37, and 30 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Toronto Raptors. He's playing a ton of minutes. This is not a back-to-back, so I just think that FanDuel price is way too low. So I like Kemba Walker here versus the Toronto Raptors. Okay, another point guard that I like is Ben Simmons from the Philadelphia 76ers playing the Portland Trailblazers, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Ben Simmons has averaged 39.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 37 and 45 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 34 and 34 minutes. He's projected at 40.5 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.6 times value because he's $8,800 FanDuel salary, but he's $500 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Ben Simmons has scored 46, 48, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Portland Trailblazers. Fantastic matchup. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 229.5 points scored in this game. So I like Ben Simmons, especially on DraftKings, here versus the Portland Trailblazers. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I like Andrew Wiggins from the Golden State Warriors playing the Orlando Magic, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Andrew Wiggins has averaged 30.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 27, 30, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 38, and 28 minutes. He's projected at 31.6 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's 4.8 times value because he's $6,600 FanDuel salary, but he's $400 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Now he's got a great matchup, and Andrew Wiggins has scored 51, 21, 23, 34, and 41 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Orlando Magic. So he's got some pretty nice player versus team history here. So I love this DraftKings price. So I like Andrew Wiggins here versus the Orlando Magic. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Josh Jackson from the Detroit Pistons playing the Indiana Pacers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Josh Jackson has averaged 23 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 24 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He scored 25, 47, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 28, 37, and 24 minutes. Now he's only projected at 25.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.6 times value. He's $5,500 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. But the reason that I like this pick here, it's a good matchup and he's playing a bunch of minutes. I like the fact that he got 28 and 37 minutes in his last 2 games. This guy is a point per minute monster. He can put up a lot of fantasy points in a short amount of time. So when he's on the court for near 30 minutes, I think he can score 30 fantasy points or more here in this one and get you 5 times value or more. He's got some monster upside, and I think his ownership is going to be low. So I like Josh Jackson here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I like Jeremiah Grant from the Detroit Pistons playing the Indiana Pacers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Jeremiah Grant has averaged 39.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He scored 45, 54, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 47, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 40.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $8,200 FanDuel salary and $800 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So I like Jeremiah Grant, especially on DraftKings here versus the Indiana Pacers. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, the other small forward that I like, I'm going to give you a value play here. I like James Ennis from the Orlando Magic playing the Golden State Warriors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. James Ennis, he's only averaged 15.1 fantasy points per game on the season, but he was only playing an average of 21 minutes per game with a 13% usage rate. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 31, 15, and 21 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 34, 29, and 23 minutes. So he's been playing a ton of minutes the past couple of games. Now, he's only projected at 16.7 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 20 plus fantasy points here and get you 5 times value or more. He's only $4,200 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. So I like James Ennis here versus the Golden State Warriors. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Jason Tatum from the Boston Celtics playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Jason Tatum has averaged 44.2 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 31% usage rate. He scored 34, 41, and 55 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 37, 35, and 40 minutes. So he was kind of a flop the last time I picked him. Only 34 fantasy points. That's not going to get it done when you're paying $89 to $9,500 salary on this player, but he is projected at 45.6 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 4.8 times value. He's $9,500 FanDuel salary, but he's $600 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. He's got that 50 plus fantasy point upside, so you're getting him for under $9K on DraftKings. I think that's a steal. And take a look at his last 5 games versus the Toronto Raptors. He scored 55, 57, 65, 40, and 36 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Raptors. It's got a great matchup here. It's a fast-paced game, so I like Jason Tatum here versus the Toronto Raptors. Okay, a nice mid-range play for you at the power forward position. I like Blake Griffin from the Detroit Pistons playing the Indiana Pacers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Blake Griffin has averaged 24.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. Now, he scored 26 fantasy points in 31 minutes last game, but the reason I like this pick is because of that 31 minutes. This is not a back-to-back. He should get around 30 minutes in this game, and he's projected at 23.1 fantasy points here tonight. Now, I think he's going to score at least 26 fantasy points and get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,100 FanDuel salary and $200 more on DraftKings. And he did score 43 fantasy points in his last game versus the Pacers. It's a great matchup. Now, I've given you a few of these Detroit Pistons players. I wouldn't stack 3 Detroit Pistons here against the Pacers, but I wouldn't mind playing 2 of the 3 or just one of them. But I like Blake Griffin here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Joel Embiid from the Philadelphia 76ers playing the Portland Trailblazers, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Joel Embiid has averaged 51 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 33% usage rate. He scored 62, 52, and 46 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 31, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 52.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's $10,800 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. Now, I couldn't find a lot of centers that I liked here in this 5-game slate, so I think I'm going to pay up for Joel Embiid. Vegas thinks there's going to be 229.5 points scored in this game. It's a great matchup, so I like Joel Embiid here versus the Portland Trailblazers. Now, if you're looking for a mid-range play at the center position, take a look at Kelly Olynyk from the Miami Heat playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 13th worst defense overall, and they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Kelly Olynyk has averaged 23.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 26, 27, and 27 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 26, and 20 minutes. Now, I think he's going to score at least 26 fantasy points here in this game and get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,100 FanDuel salary and $100 less on DraftKings. So I like Kelly Olynyk, who scored 25, 25, 29, and 20 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Houston Rockets. So I think that's pretty decent player versus team history, hitting value 4 out of those 5 games. So I like Kelly Olynyk here versus the Houston Rockets.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com.
You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.